He used to sit in a large office on the top floor, looking down at the city like he owned it. Every decision he made seemed to shape the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands of people. He was the CEO, powerful, respected, untouchable. People listened when he spoke. People worked late to please him, and people admired him from afar. But power has a way of being fragile, even when it seems endless. One day, everything changed. A mistake, a betrayal, or perhaps just bad luck, it was hard to tell. One moment he was at the top, shaking hands and signing papers with confidence. The next, he was being questioned, criticized, stripped of authority, and left with nothing but uncertainty. The office that once seemed like a kingdom now felt empty and cold. The walls, the furniture, even the view from the window felt different, harsher somehow. His phone, once buzzing with important messages, now lay silent. Calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. The world he knew had turned its back. He tried to hide it at first. He walked through the city with his suit pressed, his hair neat, pretending he still belonged. People still bowed politely, but the respect was polite and distant, not the genuine admiration he was used to. He went to meetings that seemed meaningless, answered emails that no one cared about, and sat through conversations that felt shallow. His mind kept replaying the day everything fell apart. The betrayal hurt more than anything, the sudden realization that those he trusted most had been ready to watch him fail at night. The loneliness was worse. The mansion felt too big, the rooms echoing with memories of laughter that no longer existed. Even the staff avoided him, unsure how to act around someone who had lost everything. He walked from room to room, touching objects that had once given him comfort, now just reminders of loss. His heart ached in ways money could never fix. He had power, he had influence, he had people who admired him, but now he had none of it, and the emptiness that came with it was crushing. He tried to reach out. Friends, old colleagues, family. He made calls that were left unanswered, messages that went ignored. He realized that his relationships had been built on what he could offer, not who he was. The more he reached out, the more he felt the weight of his isolation. His mind replayed memories of his life as a powerful man, contrasting them with the reality of being invisible in a world he once dominated. One evening, sitting on the balcony, he whispered into the night, a quiet plea, almost a breath, almost a thought. Help me. He didn't know who he was asking. Maybe the universe, maybe someone who still cared, maybe just himself. The city lights flickered below, indifferent to his suffering. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. And the truth was, he didn't know how to move forward. Days passed, each one blending into the next. He wandered the streets, unrecognized, unnoticed, and oddly relieved by the anonymity. He tried small tasks, buying groceries, cooking a simple meal, but failed in ways that surprised him. Simple things he once took for granted now seemed impossible. He realized he had spent so long relying on assistants, advisors, and systems that he had forgotten how to manage his own life. Even making decisions felt heavy. He began to understand that the fall had stripped him bare. All the walls he had built, all the power he had hoarded, all the respect he had demanded, they were gone. And now, what remained was just him, fragile and human. The realization scared him more than anything else. He had always thought power made life easier. But now he saw it had only hidden the truth. Without resilience, without kindness, without connection, he was alone. One rainy evening, exhausted and wandering the city, he ended up in a small park. The rain soaked him through, but he hardly noticed. He sat on a bench, head bowed, thinking about the life he had lost. He watched families passing by, friends laughing, strangers helping one another. There was warmth, care, and strength, in ways money had never provided. He felt a strange longing, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He wanted that connection, that human touch. But he didn't know how to reach it. He tried talking to people, but his pride, his past, and his shame kept him from asking for help. His voice was almost lost in the rain, barely audible even to himself. But in that quiet desperation, he whispered again, more clearly this time, a single, desperate plea. "Someone, please." It was not loud, not dramatic, not filled with demands. Just a quiet human need, simple and real. That moment, unnoticed by most, became the turning point. Somewhere in the city, far from the boardrooms and mansions, someone heard that quiet plea. Not because it was loud, but because it was human. And that someone was a single dad, living a life completely different from the CEO. But strong in ways the CEO had never understood. The single dad was busy with his own struggles, raising a child alone, working hard every day to make ends meet. Yet something about that whisper touched him, something that resonated deeply with his own experiences of struggle and resilience. The CEO didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change. He had reached a point of total vulnerability, stripped of pretense and pride. And in that vulnerability, he had opened a door he didn't even know existed. A door to human connection, compassion, and understanding. The city continued around him, unaware, busy with its own pace, but for the first time, a faint glimmer of hope began to stir inside him. He stayed in the park long after the rain stopped, staring at the wet paths and the reflections in puddles. He thought about his mistakes, about the arrogance that had isolated him, about the trust he had misplaced. The weight of his life pressed on him, but now, for the first time, felt a spark of recognition. He could not fix this alone, but maybe, just maybe, someone could help him. He didn't know who, he didn't know when, but that single thought, fragile as it was, brought him a small measure of peace. He left the park that night, drenched and tired, carrying a sense of emptiness, but also a strange sense of readiness. He didn't know it yet, but life had plans for him. The CEO, once untouchable, had become human, and in becoming human, he had become capable of receiving the help he needed the most. The whisper had been sent, the plea had been made, and somewhere, someone had already answered it in ways he could never imagine. And that is how it all began, the fall, the despair, and the first quiet cry for help that would change everything. The powerful man who had lost everything was about to meet someone who could show him strength not in money or influence, but in heart, courage, and humanity. The world that had abandoned him had unknowingly set the stage for a different kind of power, one that was far more meaningful than anything he had ever known. The single dad lived a life, far removed from boardrooms and business deals. Every day for him was a struggle, not for fame or respect, but for survival and care. His small apartment was filled with laughter and chaos, with a child who depended on him for everything. He woke up early, made breakfast, walked his child to school, worked long hours, and returned home exhausted, but never too tired to spend a few minutes playing or reading a story. He had no assistance, no wealth, no influence, yet he carried a strength that was quiet but powerful. He understood what it meant to be human, to face challenges, to persevere. One rainy evening, after dropping his child at a friend's house for an extra hour of care, he was walking home through a part of the city that was darker, quieter, and less traveled. He had been thinking about the day's struggles, the bills that were too high, the deadlines that seemed impossible, the little moments of frustration that built up in silence. And yet he carried on, not because he wanted recognition, because he loved his child, and love gave him purpose. That night he heard it. A whisper carried on the wind, soft and barely audible, yet unmistakable. It was not loud, not demanding, not dramatic, just a human plea filled with despair. "Help me," it said. He paused, looking around, expecting perhaps a lost animal or someone playing a trick. But there was no one immediately visible. The whisper seemed to come from the shadows near a park bench, where the streetlights flickered faintly. He felt a strange pull, an instinctive feeling that someone needed him. Curiosity overcame caution. He approached slowly, finding a man sitting there, drenched from the rain, head bowed, shoulders trembling. The man looked out of place not just because of his fine clothing, which was soaked and muddy, but because of the sheer emptiness in his eyes. There was no anger, no arrogance, no fear, just pure vulnerability. The single dad instinctively understood that look. He had seen it in his own life, in moments when he had felt powerless, when the world seemed bigger than he could handle. Without thinking twice, He knelt beside him. The man looked up, startled, as if he hadn't expected anyone to respond. The single dad offered a small, reassuring smile. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was calm, kind, steady. The CEO hesitated, unsure how to respond. He was not used to kindness without expectation, or not used to someone asking about him without judgment or curiosity about his status. Finally, he whispered, I don't know." It was a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of everything he had lost. The single dad nodded. He didn't push, didn't question further. He simply said, "Come with me. Let's get you out of the rain," without waiting for permission. He helped the CEO to his feet, guiding him gently through the quiet streets toward his small apartment. The CEO stumbled at first, embarrassed by his weakness, ashamed that someone he didn't know was helping him. He had always been in control, always the one giving directions. Now he was dependent, and it was humbling in ways he had never imagined. The apartment was modest, but warm, filled with signs of a life being lived fully despite limited means. Toys, books, and drawings scattered across the living room, the smell of freshly cooked food lingering faintly in the air. The single dad guided him to a chair and offered a towel. "Sit," he said simply. The CEO accepted, unsure what else to do. He had never sat like this before, without purpose, without a meeting to attend or an important decision to make. He felt strangely exposed, yet strangely safe. The single dad went about preparing something simpler: a cup of tea, a warm blanket, a place to sit. He didn't ask questions about the CEO's life, didn't comment on his clothing or his situation. He treated him like a person in need, not a CEO in disgrace. The CEO, in turn, felt an unfamiliar relief. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the weight of judgment. He didn't need to impress anyone, didn't need to hide behind authority. He simply existed, and it was enough. As the evening passed, the CEO began to speak in small, halting sentences. He talked about his life, his fall, his mistakes, and his loneliness. He didn't expect advice, didn't expect judgment. He just spoke, and the single dad listened. Listening, without interrupting, without imposing, without offering solutions, unless asked, that simple act carried more comfort than the CEO could have imagined. It was human, raw, and honest. The single dad shared small stories of his own life too. It's not to boast, not to compete, but to connect. He spoke of long days at work, of sleepless nights, of the joy and exhaustion of raising a child alone. He spoke of moments of fear, moments of courage, moments when he felt like giving up but didn't. The CEO listened, amazed at how strength could exist without wealth, how courage could thrive in the absence of power, and how human connection could feel more valuable than any success he had ever known. Night fell outside, the city quiet but alive with distant sounds. The CEO realized he had been crying not out of sadness alone, but out of relief. It's out of recognition that someone had seen him, heard him, and responded without expectation. It was the first act of empathy he had experienced in months, perhaps years, and it had a profound effect. It made him feel lighter, more human, more capable of facing whatever came next. The single dad didn't offer solutions, didn't promise miracles, didn't ask for gratitude. He simply provided presence, understanding, and support. And that presence began to build a bridge between two very different lives. The CEO, who had once wielded power effortlessly, began to see the value of simple human acts of kindness. He began to understand that real strength was not in controlling others or in material wealth, but in resilience, compassion, and the courage to face life's challenges with honesty. As the night deepened, they sat in silence, sharing warmth in ways that words couldn't fully capture. The CEO felt something shift inside him, a sense of hope, a sense that maybe he could rebuild, not in the way he had before, but in a new, truer way. He realized that he had been given an unexpected gift, the chance to learn from someone who lived courageously without recognition, who faced life's struggles head-on, and who found joy and purpose not in wealth, but in love and responsibility. By the time the CEO left the apartment to return to a temporary place of rest, he felt different. Not powerful, not in control, not wealthy, but human in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be for decades. He knew he had found a guide, a teacher, and a friend in the single dad. He didn't yet know how this relationship would unfold. He only knew that for the first time in a long time, he felt seen, heard, and understood. The single dad watched him go, quietly reflecting on the encounter. He had responded to a human call for help. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet he felt the subtle shift in the air, the promise of change that human kindness could bring. He had no idea how far this connection would go. But he knew that answering a whisper in the dark could make a difference in ways neither of them could yet imagine. And so, the two lives, different in every possible way, had crossed paths. One was at the height of human fragility, stripped of everything he thought defined him. The other was strong in the quiet, everyday battles of life, showing that true courage is not always visible. That night marked the beginning of a journey neither could foresee fully, but both would come to understand. Human connection, empathy, and small acts of courage could change lives in ways money, power, or status never could. The CEO had whispered, and the single dad had answered, opening a door to a path neither had imagined. A path that would teach lessons far beyond wealth or position, and reveal strength where it mattered most, in the heart. The days after that rainy evening were strange for the CEO. He found himself thinking about the single dad constantly. It wasn't just curiosity or gratitude. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a mix of hope, humility, and the desire to learn. He had always believed that power came from influence, money, and control. Now, he began to realize that real strength might come from something much simpler, but much harder to master. Patience, courage, and kindness. He tried small changes in his life. He cooked his own meals, something he had never done before. At first, it was awkward and frustrating. He burned eggs, spilled coffee, and struggled with recipes that should have been simple. But he persisted because he wanted to feel capable again, even in small ways. Each tiny victory made him feel more alive, more human. He began to understand that success was not about grandeur or recognition, but about showing up and trying, even when it was difficult. The single dad noticed his efforts. He didn't judge, didn't offer excessive praise, but gave small guidance when needed. He showed the CEO how to balance tasks, how to manage frustration, how to prioritize simple steps, instead of expecting instant perfection. Slowly, the CEO started to trust not only the single dad's guidance, but also his own ability to face challenges without fear of failure. He began to feel a quiet pride, not the kind that came from wealth or power, but the kind that came from doing something difficult and seeing progress. One afternoon, the CEO attempted something he had never done in years. He went outside to help others. He noticed a neighbor struggling with groceries, and without hesitation, offered to assist. At first, the neighbor looked surprised, unsure why a man who looked so well-dressed was helping with something so ordinary. The CEO didn't care about impressions. He felt a strange joy in giving his time and effort simply to help, without expecting anything in return. The single dad watched quietly from a distance, smiling to himself. Knowing that the CEO was learning lessons no amount of money could ever teach, the CEO began to notice the power of connection. He watched people care for each other, strangers lending a hand, small communities forming around empathy and shared effort. He realized that all the influence he had once commanded could not teach him what he was learning now. Humility, resilience, and kindness had become his new teachers. He saw the single dad not as someone lesser in society, but as a mentor in life, someone who showed strength without needing recognition, courage without expecting applause. Challenges kept coming. There were days when the CEO failed, when frustration overtook him, when he wanted to give up and retreat to the safety of isolation. But the single dad was always there, offering guidance and support. Sometimes it was quiet advice. Sometimes it was simply presence and unspoken reassurance that he was not alone. The CEO began to understand that asking for help was not weakness, but a step toward growth and connection. It was a lesson he had never learned in boardrooms, surrounded by Yasmin and Skop. As they spent more time together, the CEO began to reflect on his past. He remembered decisions made with arrogance, relationships neglected, opportunities wasted because he measured value only in money and influence. He felt regret, of course, but also a resolve to change. He realized that the real impact he could have in the world was not in contracts or mergers, but in helping others, in listening and learning. He wanted to rebuild, not his wealth, but his character, and he knew that the single dad could help him navigate this unfamiliar territory. One day, the CEO and the single dad worked together on a small community project. A local park had been neglected, overgrown with weeds, broken benches, and litter scattered everywhere. The CEO initially felt out of place, unsure how to help. But the single dad showed him the way, handing him tools, explaining small steps, and encouraging him to keep going. The CEO began to feel the satisfaction of contributing without reward, without recognition, just for the good of others. Sweat on his brow, hands dirty, heart full, he experienced a sense of purpose that money had never given him. During these days, the CEO also started to rebuild his confidence. But it was different now. It wasn't the arrogance of a powerful man who believed he could control the world. It was a quiet, resilient confidence that came from facing challenges, making mistakes, and learning from them. He began to see the world differently, noticing the small acts of courage and kindness that made life meaningful. He started to appreciate life not for what he could gain from it, but for what he could give and learn. He also began to see the single dad's life through new eyes. Every day, the dad balanced work, care for his child, and life's unexpected hurdles. Yet he carried it all with patience, determination, and humor. The CEO was amazed at how much strength one person could hold without breaking, how much love one person could give without expecting recognition. He felt inspired and humbled. It was a lesson he needed desperately, and he realized he had much to learn before he could truly feel strong again. The CEO's personal growth wasn't just internal. He began to make small contributions in the neighborhood, helping people with errands, listening to their stories, and offering practical help when he could. He realized that he had been given the gift of starting over, and he didn't want to waste it. Each smile he received, each word of thanks, became a building block for the person he was becoming. He felt a sense of satisfaction that he had never experienced in boardrooms or offices, a feeling deeper than any financial success. Even the child of the single dad became a teacher in unexpected ways. The CEO watched the small, everyday moments, playing, learning, laughing, and sometimes crying. He learned patience, empathy, and the power of unconditional love. The child had no concern for status or wealth, only for presence and kindness. The CEO realized that this was the kind of strength that lasted, the kind that mattered in the end. There were setbacks, of course. The CEO sometimes reverted to old habits, letting frustration or impatience take over. But the single dad was always there to remind him, through words or example, that growth was a process, not an instant transformation. They both learned from each other. The CEO learned humility and resilience, while the single dad saw the value of sharing his strength, the power of helping someone truly in need. One evening, after a long day of work in the community, the CEO sat quietly on the same park bench where he had first whispered for help. He reflected on his journey so far. He had fallen from power, faced loneliness and despair, and yet found hope through a simple act of human connection. He realized that strength was not measured by what he could control, but by how he responded when control was lost. The single dad had shown him that even in the darkest moments, one person's compassion could change a life. The CEO began to understand a truth he had ignored for decades. Life is not about power or wealth. It's about connection, empathy, and courage. He had been blind to this truth while chasing influence and money, but now it was clear. He wanted to live differently, to be different, to embrace challenges with honesty and resilience. He wanted to rebuild not just himself, but the relationships and trust that had been lost along the way. The single dad watched quietly, offering guidance only when needed, never pushing, always supporting. The CEO had begun to internalize the lessons, learning to face life's difficulties with patience and humility. He was discovering a new kind of confidence, one rooted in character and human connection rather than wealth or authority. And as days turned into weeks, he felt a quiet transformation take place inside him by the end of this period. The CEO had learned more about life in a few weeks than he had in decades of power. He had discovered that human strength is often invisible, found in quiet perseverance, empathy, and love. He had begun to rebuild his life, not on foundations of money or influence, but on the simple, enduring qualities that make life meaningful. The journey was far from over, but he was no longer lost. He had found a guide, a mentor, and a friend in the single dad. Someone who would continue to show him the way forward. And so, the CEO, who had once been at the pinnacle of power, now walked a path of humility, growth, and human connection. He faced challenges, learned lessons, and began to see that the strength he sought had always been around him. In acts of kindness, in perseverance, and in the courage to face life honestly. The journey was just beginning. But he had taken the first steps toward a life richer in meaning than anything his power had ever offered. The CEO's life had begun to change, in ways he never imagined. Every day he spent with the single dad was a lesson in patience, resilience, and understanding. He was learning that life was not about dominance or control, but about small acts of courage, empathy, and care. Even the smallest gestures, helping someone carry groceries, listening without judgment, sharing a meal, began to feel like monumental victories. He had spent years chasing power and recognition. But these simple human connections were teaching him more about true strength than any boardroom ever could. One morning, the single dad suggested they visit a local community center that was struggling. The center helped people who were homeless or in need, offering meals, clothes, and guidance. The CEO hesitated at first, unsure how he would fit in, but the single dad encouraged him gently. "You don't need to be perfect," he said. "Just be present." That simple advice made all the difference. He realized that he had spent so much of his life trying to be perfect, trying to control everything, that he had forgotten what it meant to just be human. When they arrived at the center, the CEO was overwhelmed. The air was filled with the smells of cooking food and cleaning supplies. People spoke in hurried voices, some frustrated, some hopeful. The CEO was used to being in charge, giving orders and controlling the environment. Here, he had to step back, listen, and learn. The single dad guided him through small tasks, organizing donations, serving meals, helping children with homework. Each task felt unfamiliar, but also rewarding in a way he had never experienced. The CEO began to notice the stories of the people around him. He met a woman who had lost her home, but was determined to keep her child in school. He met an older man who had been unemployed for years, but volunteered to help at the center. He saw courage in the faces of those who had little and yet gave so much. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was part of something bigger than himself, something that could not be bought, measured, or controlled. As the weeks passed, the CEO became more comfortable in this new environment. He started to find joy in helping others without expecting anything in return. He learned to listen, to empathize, and to appreciate the small victories in life. He also began to understand that his past mistakes were not just about lost power, but about the relationships he had neglected. He realized that it was never too late to rebuild trust, to offer kindness. And to make a difference, the single dad continued to mentor him. Not in a way that demanded obedience, but in a way that encouraged growth. He showed the CEO how to balance giving with caring for oneself, how to manage frustration, and how to see the value in small, consistent efforts. The CEO began to internalize these lessons, slowly becoming more patient, humble, and thoughtful. He realized that real leadership was not about commanding others, but about inspiring and supporting them. One afternoon, they decided to take on a bigger project together, restoring a neglected playground in the neighborhood. The playground was overgrown with weeds, broken swings, and rusty slides. The CEO felt uncertain at first, unsure how much he could contribute. But the single dad encouraged him to start with small tasks. He learned to dig, paint, and repair with care. It was hard work, and he made mistakes along the way. But each mistake was a lesson, each success a triumph as they worked. The CEO noticed how the local children watched them, curious and cautious at first, then gradually joining in. He saw the joy on their faces as swings were fixed, slides were cleaned, and benches were repainted. He felt a sense of fulfillment that no boardroom victory had ever given him. It was tangible, human, and real. He realized that impact was measured not in contracts or deals, but in the smiles and well-being of those around him. The CEO also began to reflect on his own life more deeply. He thought about the people he had hurt, the relationships he had taken for granted, and the arrogance that had led to his downfall. He felt regret, but also a desire to make amends. He started reaching out, writing letters, making calls, and reconnecting with those he had neglected. It wasn't easy. Some were resistant, some skeptical, and some angry. But the act of trying, of showing vulnerability and sincerity, was transformative in itself. Meanwhile, the bond between the CEO and the single dad grew stronger. They shared stories, laughter, and struggles. The CEO learned that strength was not measured by wealth or authority, but by the ability to face life's challenges with honesty and compassion. The single dad, in turn, saw the CEO's commitment to change and admired his courage in embracing humility. Their friendship became a foundation for growth, trust, and mutual respect. The CEO began to see the world differently. He noticed small acts of kindness everywhere, neighbors helping each other, people sharing food, children helping elders. He realized that strength and influence were not exclusive to the wealthy or powerful, but existed in everyday acts of courage and compassion. He felt inspired to carry these lessons forward, to be a source of support and encouragement wherever he could. One evening, after a long day of work at the playground, the CEO and the single dad sat on a bench, exhausted but content. They watched the children play, laughing and running freely. The CEO reflected on how far he had come. He had fallen from power, faced despair, and yet found hope through connection and empathy. He realized that true leadership was about serving, not controlling, about listening, not commanding, and about giving, not taking. The CEO also began to understand the importance of gratitude. He learned to appreciate the small moments, the warmth of a meal, the laughter of a child, the satisfaction of hard work. He saw that life was full of opportunities to make a difference, and that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward, affecting more lives than he had ever imagined. The single dad had taught him that strength and resilience were built not in isolation, but in community, in connection, and in care. As the days turned into weeks, the CEO's transformation became evident. People in the neighborhood began to notice his efforts, not because he sought recognition, but because his actions spoke for themselves. He was patient, helpful, and considerate. He listened to others, offered support, and shared his own experiences honestly. He had become a part of something larger than himself, contributing in ways that were meaningful and lasting. The CEO also began to teach others what he had learned. He shared his experiences with those who struggled with pride, frustration, or fear. He encouraged them to embrace humility, resilience, and compassion. He realized that true strength was not measured by what one could take or control, but by what one could give, how one could inspire, and how one could support others. His life had become a lesson in empathy, courage, and growth. The single dad watched all of this quietly, proud of the progress the CEO had made. He knew that the journey was ongoing, that challenges would continue to arise, and that setbacks were inevitable. But he also knew that the CEO had learned the most important lessons: to face life with honesty, to seek connection, and to value the strength of the human spirit. Together, they had built a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and shared purpose. The CEO now understood that his fall from power had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced him to confront his weaknesses, to embrace humility, and to discover the true meaning of strength. He had learned that life was not about wealth or influence, but about character, resilience, and the ability to connect with others. He had found purpose, not in domination, but in service, not in recognition, but in genuine human connection. And so, as the sun set over the playground they had restored, the CEO felt a sense of peace and accomplishment unlike anything he had experienced before. He had learned to see the world through new eyes, to value the small victories, and to embrace the power of empathy and kindness. His journey was far from over, but he had taken the most important steps. He had opened his heart, accepted guidance, and committed to a life of growth, service, and connection. The single dad sat beside him, smiling quietly. He had witnessed a transformation that was not just about one man, but about the ripple effect of human connection. He had shown the CEO that true power is measured not by wealth or status, but by the courage to face life honestly, the willingness to learn, and the ability to support others. Together, they had created something stronger than either could have achieved alone. A life enriched by compassion, resilience, and the quiet strength of the human heart. The CEO had come a long way since that rainy evening when he had whispered for help on a quiet park bench. Life had tested him, humbled him, and reshaped his understanding of strength, purpose, and human connection. With the guidance of the single dad, he had learned lessons money and power could never teach. He had learned to listen, to give, to fail and try again, and most importantly, to value the quiet resilience found in ordinary people. By now, he was no longer the man who feared every small failure or needed constant control. He had begun to find joy in helping others and listening, and in making small but meaningful contributions to the lives of those around him. The community they had worked in had become a second home to him. He knew the children by name, recognized their struggles, and celebrated their small victories. He found satisfaction in fixing things, lending a hand, and seeing the immediate impact of his efforts. One morning, the CEO and the single dad decided to organize a neighborhood event to help local families in need. The planning was a challenge. They had limited resources and time. Yet, the CEO approached it differently now. Instead of delegating and controlling, he collaborated, listening to ideas, encouraging input, and sharing responsibilities. He realized that leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice or making the final decision, but about fostering trust, cooperation, and purpose. The event was held in a small community hall. Families came, many struggling to make ends meet, others curious about the new faces who had been helping in their neighborhood. The CEO worked alongside everyone, serving meals, organizing activities, and helping children with games. His hands grew tired, his clothes smudged, yet he smiled genuinely for the first time in years. He was no longer concerned with appearances or reputation. He was present, fully engaged, and contributing meaningfully. During the event, he noticed a father struggling with his child's school supplies. Without hesitation, he stepped in to help, quietly organizing the materials and offering encouragement. The father thanked him, touched by the gesture, not knowing the man helping him had once controlled an empire. The CEO felt a warmth he had never felt before, satisfaction rooted in empathy, connection, and shared humanity. He realized that this not boardroom accolades or wealth was the kind of impact that truly mattered. The single dad watched him, silently proud. He had always believed that strength was found in everyday courage, in persistence, and in acts of kindness. Seeing the CEO embrace these values, not just in word but in action, was evidence of the transformation that had taken place. He knew that the CEO's journey was far from over, but the foundations of humility, compassion, and resilience had been firmly established. After the event, the CEO and the single dad sat outside, exhausted but content. The CEO reflected on how much he had changed. He thought about his old life, filled with power and control, and realized that it had been hollow. He had been admired, feared, and envied, yet he had been lonely and disconnected. Now, he understood that real respect and fulfillment came from service, empathy, and connection. He had learned that strength was not about dominance, but about perseverance, courage, and the ability to positively influence the lives of others. The CEO began to apply these lessons in other areas of his life. He reconnected with estranged family members, apologized for past mistakes, and worked to rebuild trust and understanding. He discovered that vulnerability, honesty, and consistent effort were more powerful than authority or wealth. People responded to him differently, not with fear or obligation, but with genuine warmth, appreciation, and respect. He also began mentoring others, sharing his story and the lessons he had learned. He spoke about the dangers of pride, the importance of humility, and the value of resilience. He encouraged others to embrace challenges, seek guidance, and find meaning in acts of kindness. His experience became a testament to the fact that no matter how far someone falls, it is always possible to rebuild, grow, and positively impact others. The single dad continued to guide him, not out of obligation, but as a partner in this journey of growth. They worked together on new community projects, tutoring children, assisting struggling families, and organizing neighborhood improvements. The CEO learned that true success was not measured by wealth or recognition, but by the difference one made in the lives of others. He felt fulfilled, knowing that he was now contributing in a way that was meaningful, lasting, and authentic. One afternoon, the CEO and the single dad visited a hospital to deliver supplies to children in need. The CEO was hesitant at first, unsure how to interact, but the single dad reminded him to approach with kindness, patience, and openness. He held the hands of children, listened to their stories, and offered encouragement. Their laughter, their gratitude, and their innocence filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known. He realized that life's greatest rewards were found not in power, money, or influence, but in connection, compassion, and service. Through all of this, the CEO noticed a profound change within himself. He was calmer, more patient, and more aware of the needs of others. He had learned to manage frustration, to celebrate small victories, and to embrace failure as a step toward growth. He no longer sought approval from the world, for he had found validation in the simple acts of helping, listening, and caring. The single dad had taught him that strength and resilience were not about what one had, but about what one gave. Even in his moments of doubt or setback, the CEO remembered the lessons he had learned. He reflected on the people who had touched his life, the children he helped, Ace's families he supported, and the single dad who had become his guide. He realized that these connections, forged through empathy and shared effort, were far more valuable than any achievement he had once chased. He understood that life's true measure was not wealth or influence, but the positive impact one left on others. The CEO also began to see the broader world differently. He noticed the small acts of kindness happening around him, the neighbor helping carry groceries, the volunteer tutoring children, the stranger offering a smile. He realized that strength, courage, and resilience existed everywhere, often unnoticed. He felt grateful to be part of this network of human connection and contribution, and he committed to continuing his efforts. No matter how small or unnoticed they might be, months passed, and the CEO had transformed completely. He was no longer a man defined by status or wealth. He had found purpose, humility, and true human strength. The single dad had helped him see that even in the darkest times, connection, compassion, and courage could light the way. The CEO had learned to listen, to give, to persevere, to appreciate life in its simplest yet most profound forms. In the end, the CEO's journey was not about regaining power or wealth. It was about becoming human, embracing vulnerability, and learning to live with empathy and purpose. He had discovered that true success was measured not by what one could acquire, but by the lives one could touch and the hearts one could lift. And as he walked through the neighborhood he had helped transform, watching children play, families laugh, and neighbors care for one another, he knew that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along: strength, meaning, and connection. The CEO turned to the single dad, gratitude shining in his eyes. He knew that without this man, without the quiet guidance, patience, and example he had been shown, he might never have found this path. The single dad smiled, not needing recognition, content in knowing that a life had been changed through simple human kindness. Together, they had shown that even in despair, Even in the face of loss, there was hope, there was growth, and there was the power of connection. And so the CEO, once a man defined by his wealth and authority, now walked a life defined by compassion, resilience, and empathy. He had fallen, he had learned, and he had grown. And in that growth, he had found the true meaning of strength, purpose, and human connection, the kind that no fortune, no title, and no influence could ever provide. His journey had come full circle, and he was ready to continue, not as a powerful man, but as a strong, kind, and human one, forever changed by the wisdom of a single dad who had answered a whisper in the dark.